Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is not just a monster story. It is a story about the terrifying possibility that the monster is not outside us. It is the part of ourselves we try hardest to hide. Welcome to a special Classic Briefs explainer on The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Today, we are going to unpack one of the most chilling psychological thrillers ever written.
You know the phrase, right? We call someone a Jekyll and Hyde when they seem to be living a totally double life. But what if the monster you fear most is the part of yourself you try the absolute hardest to hide? If you haven't actually read Robert Louis Stevenson's classic text, you might think it's just your basic werewolf-style monster story where a good guy chugs a potion and turns into a cartoonish villain. But honestly, it is so much darker and so much more subtle than that. It is a profound, incredibly suspenseful mystery about the terrifying things we are capable of when we think no one is watching.
Section 1, The Monster Within Us. Let's dive right into this human duality.
This story is just a brilliant exploration of being two different people at once. On one side, we have Dr. Henry Jekyll. He's a large, handsome, 50-year-old man. He is super charitable, he throws these fancy dinner parties for the elite, and he is absolutely obsessed with his public image. But then, you have to look at the stark contrast of Mr. Edward Hyde. He is described as pale, dwarfish, and highly impulsive. But you know what the most unsettling thing about Hyde is? People can't even describe what is actually wrong with his face. He just radiates this unexplainable, murderous deformity. Whenever a respectable person so much as looks at him, they feel physically sick and get this overwhelming desire to just end him. He is the pure, unfiltered embodiment of repressed evil.
Section 2. A City of Secrets. Welcome to Victorian London.
To really get why Hyde is so utterly terrifying, we have to understand the world he was born into. Victorian London had a very strict societal code. Your reputation was literally everything. If you were considered a gentleman, your public morality had to be spotless. Any private, forbidden desires, any tiny misbehavior or wild impulse, those had to be absolutely suppressed and buried deep, deep down. And it's exactly this intense, suffocating pressure that created a terrifying need for men like Jekyll to hide their true natures.
Which brings us to how we, as the audience, actually experience this story. We don't just jump right inside Jekyll's head. Instead, we follow a lawyer named Mr. Utterson and his peers, like his friend Mr. Enfield. And I want you to consider this quote from Enfield. "I make it a rule of mine. The more it looks like Queer Street, the less I ask." That right there tells you everything you need to know about this society. They are so terrified of scandal that their golden rule is to literally just look the other way. Utterson acts as our detective, slowly piecing together a horror story in a fog-drenched world where absolutely no one wants to admit that horror even exists.
Even the actual architecture of London plays a huge part in the secrecy. Utterson realizes something crazy. There's this sinister, blistered, windowless door in a dark, dingy alleyway, a door used by the horrific Mr. Hyde. But it turns out it's actually connected to the back of Dr. Jekyll's magnificent, welcoming, bright mansion. They are literally the exact same house. So just like Jekyll and Hyde are the same person, the house itself has this very respectable public face and a rotting hidden backside. It's divided spaces for divided lives.
Section 3. Unlocking the Mystery. This is where the violence really starts to escalate.
So, the mystery kicks off in the winter. Utterson hears a deeply disturbing story about Hyde calmly trampling over the body of a screaming 8-year-old girl in the street like a juggernaut. It is cruel and it is callous. But by October, things escalate into absolute unhinged madness. Hyde commits the brutal, quote-unquote, ape-like murder of an innocent, elderly politician named Sir Danvers Carew, beating him with a cane until his bones actually shatter. And finally, by March, Hyde has completely vanished into Jekyll's laboratory, leaving behind nothing but desperate, panicked letters begging for pure chemicals.
As Utterson keeps digging into these events, his discoveries just get more and more bizarre. First, he gets his hands on Jekyll's will, which leaves his massive fortune to the fiendish Mr. Hyde in the event of Jekyll's disappearance. Then he discovers that shared residence we talked about earlier. But the absolute most chilling moment, the real gut punch of the whole investigation, happens when Utterson compares a letter from Hyde to a dinner invitation from Jekyll. The handwriting is identical. Literally, the only difference is the slope of the letters. Utterson's blood runs cold because he thinks Henry Jekyll forged a letter for a murderer. He assumes Jekyll is being blackmailed. He has absolutely no idea they are actually the same man.
Section 4. The Fatal Experiment. Let's look at Jekyll's confession.
It's only at the very, very end of the story that we get the confession that shifts our focus from the lawyer's external investigation to the doctor's internal, fatal motivations. Why did Jekyll do all this? Well, the answer lies in this incredibly powerful quote from his final confession. He felt the crushing weight of being two different people, a respectable doctor and a man with hidden, much darker appetites. He called it the curse of mankind, that these polar twins of good and evil are forced to endlessly struggle within us. His grand, tragic ambition was actually a scientific one. What if he could chemically separate them? Think about it, if he could just put his evil into a completely different body, his good side could live without any guilt, and his bad side could indulge in total moral freedom without any consequence.
So he creates a chemical concoction, a drug meant to shake the fleshly vestment. And this is not some kind of magic spell. It is a terrifying, visceral, biological shift. In the text, Dr. Lanyon, who is a fellow scientist, actually witnesses Hyde drink this potion. He watches Hyde gasp, swell, his face turning black and literally melting, until he transforms right back into Dr. Jekyll. The revelation is so profoundly shocking, so entirely contrary to the laws of nature and sanity, that it literally drains the life right out of Lanyon. He dies just weeks later from the sheer, unadulterated terror of what he has seen.
Section 5. The Loss of Control. The Tragic Descent.
What begins as this seemingly incredible scientific triumph very quickly morphs into something far more grounded and terrifying, because what follows is a terrifyingly accurate allegory for addiction. Let's look at the steps. Step 1. Temptation. The very first time he drinks the potion, he feels this reckless, intoxicating freedom. Step 2. False control. Jekyll tells Utterson, "The moment I choose, I can be rid of Mr. Hyde." Does that sound familiar? It is the classic "I can quit anytime I want" defense. But then we hit step 3, involuntary relapse. The absolute turning point of the entire story is when Jekyll goes to sleep as himself, but wakes up and sees the hairy, dwarfish hand of Edward Hyde resting on his own bedsheets. He transformed in his sleep without even taking the drug. And finally, step 4, total consumption. The evil side grows so much stronger with exercise, while the good side starves until Hyde takes over permanently.
This inevitably leads to a really bleak, tragic final image, which is perfectly captured by Poole, Jekyll's incredibly loyal butler. For a whole week, Poole hears a voice that isn't his master's, weeping like a lost soul, locked away in the cabinet, crying night and day for a pure version of that original chemical. But here's the catch. The original chemical had an unknown impurity that made it work, an impurity Jekyll can never ever replicate. When Utterson and Poole finally take an axe to the door and break it down, they find Hyde dead on the floor. He took his own life because the trap had finally completely closed in on him.
Section 6. Our Modern Double Lives. How we see Hyde today.
Now, you might be wondering, why are we still talking about this today? It's because this gothic anxiety from the 19th century connects directly to the psychological realities of right now. The modern Mr. Hyde is literally everywhere. Think about it for a second. We have these highly curated, spotless public profiles on social media. Those are our Dr. Jekylls. We show everyone how charitable, happy, and perfectly respectable we are. But then there are the anonymous online personas, the burner accounts, those digital spaces where people unleash absolute cruelty and impulsivity without their real name attached. We highly compartmentalize our private behaviors, holding on to this incredibly dangerous illusion that we have total control over our hidden habits, our screen time, our vices. We mistakenly believe, just like Jekyll did, that we can keep those dark spaces perfectly contained.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this brilliant explainer. Jekyll and Hyde still matters because it asks us, is evil a monster separate from us, or is it a part of ourselves that we make infinitely more dangerous by refusing to face it? Jekyll tried to literally gut out his darkness instead of integrating and managing it, and in doing so, he gave it a life of its own. It is a haunting warning that the shadows we refuse to acknowledge are the ones that eventually consume us. Thanks for joining me on this Classic Briefs explainer. Until next time, don't forget to keep a close eye on your own Mr. Hyde.